The NBA draft lottery is Sunday, and I do not care. It's time for your offseason guidebook as we get into the nitty-gritty, prepare for next week as we begin our season recap. All the options that we know of at this point and more on today's Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is May 9th. It will be May 10th, 2024. My name is Philip Rossman-Reich. I'm the senior writer over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can follow me. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, we've danced around it. We've talked about it. Let's get to specifics. What options we believe the Orlando Magic have, what needs they're trying to fill, the struggle they may have. Your offseason guidebook is here today on Locked On Magic. We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. But first, we want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day, no matter when you listen to us, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's right when we upload. We truly appreciate you making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. Remember, there's a great Locked On podcast covering every single team in the NBA. To search for Locked On and the team you're looking for, the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. This episode of Locked On Magic is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. So we are here. We are still less than a week from the end of the season. We'll do some season recap stuff next week. We'll intersperse some free agency stuff here. But yesterday we looked back at what led to the Magic losing in their playoff series. And as I'm recording this, the Cavs have defeated the Boston Celtics. So congrats to them for taking a game off the Celtics. We'll see if that lasts longer than that. But, Boston's going to Boston. We looked back yesterday at why the Magic lost their series and what that teaches us. And obviously that's important at this stage because we can sit here today and look forward to a very busy and very important offseason. We could sit here today and say the Magic can accomplish X, Y, and Z because they have the opportunity. They have the avenues to do so. It is certainly there's certainly a lot of opportunity here for the Orlando Magic. And so before we get to names, and we're going to talk names today, we're going to lay out the groundwork. We're going to put some names out there. I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just going to lay out all the options and what I see maybe happen. Before we get there, let's start with what you probably already surmised if you read around the internet. If you don't, then this is for you. The Orlando Magic will have roughly $31 to $32 million in cap space this summer. That is letting Gary Harris walk. That is letting Markelle Fultz walk. That is letting Goga Bitadze walk. That is keeping Joe Ingles. That is keeping Jonathan Isaac. That is, I think, also keeping Caleb Houston. That's keeping Mo Wagner. Even if the Magic keep Mo, Jonathan, and Joe Ingles, the Magic will be at roughly a little bit more than $30 million in cap room. That is enough to sign a max player, although not a Paul George or possibly not a Klay Thompson. That is enough to make a major splash. And so it's important to understand this part. Before we get into names, and I promise we're going to get into names, we're probably not going to get to everything on my rundown here as I see the timer ticking. It's important to remember that cap room is not just about free agency. I am going to broach some trade ideas today. I am going to pitch some guys that I think the Magic could target, some guys that the Magic could be looking at. It's not impossible to put that all on the table too. You can what cap room allows you to do is receive more salary than you send out. You can absorb extra money into your cap room. So again, there are a lot of opportunities out there, and as you look around the league, you're already beginning to hear it. It feels like it's going to be a very active summer around the league. The question will be, how aggressive does Jeff Weltman want to be? Where does he want to be aggressive, more importantly? And what are the kinds of players the Magic are searching for? Now, you may recall after on, I believe it's Wednesday's episode of Locked On Magic, we talked a little bit about what Jeff Weltman said during his exit interviews, on Monday. And he said, we're going to be guided by our North Star. We're going to be guided by our DNA. And I think, again, before we can look forward, we have to establish where we are. And so, while yes, and we'll talk about them, while yes, Paul George is really interesting. And there's been a lot of national media who are really getting behind the idea of Paul George. Bill Simmons loves the idea of Paul George coming to the Orlando Magic. Brian Scalabrine on the Open Floor podcast through Sports Illustrated also very much loves the idea of Paul George coming to the Magic. I think that could make them a finals contender. I'm not here to judge that quite yet. That's a future episode of Locked On Magic. I will say this. I don't think the Magic are one move away from a championship. I think there are several things they have to address. But here's the key. Here's the key to all of this. The Magic know that the bill is coming due. And Jeff Weltman made this very, very clear as well on Monday. He knows that the time is ticking for them to spend their money. That this summer is an important one because the Magic have money to spend. They have momentum behind them. They have a lot of excitement. They know what they need now. And so now is the time to assemble the chessboard, essentially, for when you are going to be capped out, when you aren't going to have the maneuverability that you have now. Is this the summer to do it? It's not the greatest free agent class. No one's gonna deny that. But as we will see, and as we will discuss it today, there are definitely free agents that would help the Magic tremendously this summer. And it's just going to come down to the right price, the right person, the right fit. What needs the Magic ultimately are trying to address. I want this guy, or I want this guy, and we start clashing over that. And I'd say, first off, let Jeff do his work. I will advocate for things that I favor, and I'll say, hey, this is what I would do, and I'll suggest some things that I would do. But I'm very much in favor of, hey, Jeff Weltman has earned our trust. I would hope as a fan base, Jeff Weltman has earned some trust with the way he has built this team. I know there's still some fans who are very much like that. The Magic could have won the series, and yes, they could have won their series against the Cavs. If Jeff Weltman had done XYZ at the deadline, I'm just like, no, hold on a sec. Magic were 3 games over 500 at the trade deadline. Sticking with the roster was actually the right decision. They went on a tear to end the season. And yes, the easy part of the schedule was coming, but Jeff Weltman measured this roster correctly. They maximized what I don't even know if they maximized what they got out of this roster. And so honestly, that's the first point we need to make. The Magic are not starting from scratch. They're not the Detroit Pistons desperately swinging and throwing money at whoever they can to get good quickly. I like what Houston's done. I've heard some people suggest the Magic should do something similar to what the Houston Rockets did with Fred VanVleet and make kind of a Godfather offer to somebody to get them in town. But Houston swung a bit wildly, and they didn't strike out, but they didn't accomplish their goals this year either. Although I think they're certainly on a better path now than they were a year ago. So no, I think the jury's still out on that. Let me start here then. My ideal summer for the Orlando Magic, I see them adding 3 players and 3 veteran players. Draft picks, it's a separate thing. We'll do draft stuff next week as well. My ideal summer, I see 3 players added to the team. 1 starting level guard, point guard, shooting guard, playmaker, more important. 1 starting level guard at the 20 to 25 million range, and then adding 2 more bench players at that non-taxpayer MLE, so that $8 to $9 million range. So an $8 to $9 million player, and then probably a $5 million player to supplement the roster, probably a third center. I don't know who that third center would be yet, but if the Magic are going to retain Wendell Carter, I know people probably got tired of me saying this all of last year. I think more people are kind of in on my camp on this, even if they're out on Wendell Carter. I'm not completely out on Wendell Carter. I think getting healthy will help him a lot. I think the injuries early this year hurt him, but Wendell Carter still never played more than 67 games in a season. If you're going to have Wendell Carter as your starting center, you need a starting caliber backup, and no, Mo Wagner is not a starting caliber backup. Love Mo Wagner. He's in the perfect role for him. Don't change. Whether that means the Magic let Goga Bitadze walk or the Magic re-sign Gary Harris, I don't know, but I would say that the Magic can fill some guys in with their two-way contracts. I think, getting Mac McClung on a two-way contract would be awesome. And I think now the Magic have the freedom to do that because they can't re-sign Admiral Schofield. I'm not sure Kevon Harris will be back. I would hope the Magic keep Trevelyan Queen for another two-way year. I think he'd be really good in that spot too. Of course, the Magic have Anthony Black. They can open up some playing time for him as the third point guard. They got Jet Howard. There's a lot of stuff the Magic are mixing and matching. And so I think what's important as we start to think about free agency is the Magic are not starting from zero. They're starting as the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference. They're starting as a 47-win team led by 3 22-year-olds. Jeff Weltman is 100% right to say, we believe our players will continue to get better. Their best basketball is still ahead of them. And so if this is where the Magic are starting, then they just need to layer some important pieces on top to make the processes easier for this team. And to me, that's what free agency, that's what this offseason is for. It's not to upend the apple cart. It's not to take away a crazy part of the Jenga tower. Always start with the bottom piece, by the way, if you're ever playing Jenga. Middle piece, fine. End pieces if you're crazy. That's what I do. The Magic don't need to do anything crazy. That's my big thing. They need to do something, and they do need to do something big, but they don't need to do anything crazy. And so with that, let's go through the Magic's chief need. Let's go through some shooting options because there are quite a few to go through if the Magic want to in free agency. We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a moment. But first, it's time for a quick word from our friends over at PrizePicks. Look, PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. All you have to do is pick more or less on 2 or more players' stats and watch the winnings roll in. The NBA playoffs are well underway right now, and you can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during the playoffs. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey, and more today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Look, this app is just so much fun. It's so easy. You play some of those other daily fantasy games, you get these confusing salary caps, confusing scoring systems. With PrizePicks, it's really simple. If you think Jaylen Brown is going to score more than 25 points, all you have to do is say he's going to score more than 25 points. You do that with any number of stats across any number of sports, get your entry together, and just watch the winnings come in. Frankly, when I was able to play, because they are no longer available in the state of Florida, boo. When I was able to play, I won pretty frequently, much more frequently than I did on other daily fantasy sports sites. So it's really about you and the entries you make, and the chances to win are so much greater than anywhere else, really. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Today's episode of Locked On Magic is also brought to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with more than 122 million parts for your #1 ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. We want to thank you for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. If you're sitting at home watching TV like I do when I'm working from home, you get tired of the shouting on the sports channels. It stinks. You're not really learning anything. It just gets you angry, and that's really what they want. But you're not learning anything. You're not getting the best analysis because you can only get that from the Locked On Sports Network, and you can get that best from the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel. It's a 24/7 streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories in sports without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news from local experts streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, it's your team every day. Okay, let's get into names. That's what you all want to hear, that you want to get those lists ready, just kind of figure out, pick who your favorite free agent is. There are 3 needs that I have listed on my cheat sheet for what the Magic need this summer. They need 3-point shooting. That one's obvious. They need a volume 3-point shooter. It's not necessarily just about a guy who can hit threes, because the much maligned Gary Harris hit 37% of his threes. Jalen Suggs hit 39% of his threes. Joe Ingles was at 40%. Paolo Banchero was at 34, 35, somewhere in there. The Magic had guys who could hit some threes. The difference was Jalen Suggs led the team with 5 3-point attempts per game. I think that especially at that off guard spot next to Jalen Suggs, the Magic do need a volume shooter, just someone who's going to hit a bunch of shots, who's going to take a bunch of shots more than they think. Orlando was not only 24th in the league in 3-point field goal percentage, and they were lower than that, as Jeff Weltman accurately pointed out. Magic were 14th in 3-point field goal percentage after January 1st, so there's definitely some sign that some internal development could lead to better 3-point shooting. Obviously, that didn't show up in the playoffs, which is where it matters. So yes, the Magic need some better spacing and better gravity more than anything else. There are plenty of options when it comes to shooters in this free agency class. If this, it depends, I'm not sure what the money's going to look like. That's going to be the trick with all of this. But there are several good shooters. And obviously the first place we got to start is the superstar players that the Magic have already been rumored connected to in this free agency period. Paul George and Klay Thompson. Those guys don't need any introduction. Paul George was a 40+% 3-point shooter this year. Klay Thompson had a down shooting year by all accounts, but one of the great 3-point shooters of all time. Even if he is not taking a single three, everybody's afraid of him taking a three. And these are 2 guys that are going to cost you $35+ million. So Orlando would have to, I would say this, for preparing for the summer, the Magic's guarantee date, or the Magic's team option date on Joe Ingles, is June 30th. If we get a press release on June 29th or June 30th saying the Magic have declined the team option on Joe Ingles, or the Magic have not picked up the team option on Joe Ingles, I think the Magic have to actively pick him up. I think that's the difference between a team option and an early termination option. But if the Magic do not pick up that team option, to me, that is a signal the Magic are going to do something big. Now, whether that's Paul George or Klay Thompson, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know at this point. I think a lot of the rumors involving them are agent leverage more than anything else. But these are 2 very high quality shooters. They're high value veterans, which, I will probably present the Horace Grant theory in full at a later date. These are 2 very, very, very big time presences on this for this Magic team. And honestly, probably the biggest splash that they would make. I know there's been some people pitching me. There's been plenty of people pitching me trades for Trae Young. We'll get to him in a minute. I've seen people pitching me trades for Donovan Mitchell, even if things still end up flaming out with Cleveland. Again, I think a win today for Cleveland against Boston, a pretty decisive win, actually, eases the pressure in Cleveland a little bit, probably more than it did after Game 7 on Sunday. There are, again, that the point of this is to tell you there are options. There are a lot of options for this Magic team to explore. And look, I don't know if I would push all my chips, not all my chips in, but I don't, if the Magic cut Joe Ingles, that brings their salary number up to about $40 to $43 million. I haven't sat down and done the actual math myself, but it's around $43 million. You're given 34 of that, 35, let's say, just make it a round number, 35 of that to Paul George or Klay Thompson. you still have $8 million to spend plus your room exception, which I believe is also is either 8 million or like 4 or 5 million. So you could still add some players, but my suspicion is that the Magic, just knowing that Jeff Waldman's a little bit more on the conservative side, whether that's good or bad, we'll find out with the results of the summer. My suspicion is that the Magic aren't going to kind of put all their eggs in that basket. They are trying to balance both letting their young team continue to develop and continue to learn and explore their games. Like their games are not completely defined. And I think, for whatever you want to, we'll get to ball handlers and point guards here in a minute. Whatever you want to say about the experiment of Paolo Banchero at point guard, it is still extremely valuable. It has still been a good thing for him. And while I think we want to reduce those minutes or reduce those possessions some, we don't want to get rid of it. And so, a Klay Thompson really works in that sense. But I also think that this Magic offense isn't built on kind of movement off screens the way that Golden State's is. Not that Klay Thompson won't still get his three-pointers. The three-pointers and the quality of three-pointers that he gets will be different in Orlando than obviously Golden State. Paul George, to me, he could play off the ball, and I think that's great. And I think the Magic do need another kind of on-ball attacker. And we'll get to, again, point guards here in a minute. I do worry that there's a little bit of stagnation that, again, he's not enough of a movement shooter. He's not enough of, it's just going to create a your turn, my turn type of ISO situation for the Magic. So I think I'm not against the moves. I'm not against the idea. I just don't think it's exactly what the Magic need. And before you come and say, well, you're going to not take an all-star, it's like, no, I'll take an all-star. But at his age, with his injury history, at that price, that's not where I'm spending this offseason, if that makes sense. If I'm the Magic, I am looking at some of the kind of specialty shooters on this market. And obviously the big one is Malik Monk. I did a whole podcast with Matt George of Locked On Kings a couple of weeks ago. I will try and link to that again, but you can go back and Locked On Kings. The Kings only have early bird rights on him, on Malik Monk. They're only able to offer him a max salary of, I think, $17 million or $17.5 million on that first year. So if Orlando swoops in at a 4-year, $88 million deal or 4 years, 84, if money is the most important thing to Malik Monk, if starting is the most important thing to Malik Monk, the Magic are going to get Malik Monk. Then the Magic have that advantage with him. And so honestly, I think if there is a target for the Magic, a realistic target, it's Malik Monk. I think that could be where the Magic go. I think San Antonio might compete with him. Detroit might compete for him. But again, Orlando offers, hey, we're a winning team. Like everyone wants to play with Wemby right now, but Orlando is a very attractive team in that race too. And I think maybe we'll have to dive into who else's cap room and where the competition might lie. But Malik Monk is definitely a player that is on my list because not only is he a spurty player, big thing that I'm after is I want a guy who can be a role player, but if Franz has to miss a game, steps up into being a star level player or can have a star level game on occasion and get, especially a heater, a guy who can get hot from three and do it pretty often, much more often than like Terrence Ross did. Malik Monk checks a lot of my boxes as far as able to play make a little bit, able to be a little bit of a ball handler, a heater as a shooter, a lot of gravity, can score can have a random 40-point game. Malik Monk is pretty high on my list as far as targets for the Orlando Magic. The other target, at least in free agency, that we'll put in the shooter bucket is Buddy Hield. We've talked about Buddy Hield a lot. We talked about him with Tony East of Locked On Pacers before the trade to Philadelphia. And you kind of went through the process with them. You can, maybe I'll link back to that from February. But Buddy Hield had a kind of a down year. So you might be able to get him at a discount, probably in the upper teens, if not just 20 flat. He's a big time shooter. Like, again, he's a volume shooter. He doesn't give you the playmaking necessarily that Monk does, but he is going to eat a lot of shots. He's going to take a lot of shots. He's going to have a random hot shooting night where he scores, 35, 40 points. That's kind of what the Magic need. Now, it's not, I want to remind everyone this. Free agency and cap space is not just about I'm blanking here, not just about free agency. Be on the lookout for guys the Magic could acquire in trades. I don't think the Magic would do this, but I suspect Chris Middleton's going to come available from Milwaukee. I don't think that's the right answer for the Magic because of the injury history, especially recently. But Chris Middleton would check some boxes for me as well. Tyler Hero is perpetually available. I don't think the Magic are going to chase after him. But the point of that is this, and we'll get to some other names here in the point guard bucket. You can find shooters elsewhere. It's not just about what there's available in free agency. And Gary Trent Jr. would be another player who's available in free agency. I don't think the Magic are going to chase after him. Not a strong defender anymore. On the smaller side, doesn't add that playmaking element the Magic probably need. I don't have him there. I've seen Bleacher Report, I've seen some people suggest the Magic make the trade for Zach LaVine. Again, don't want to deal with the injury history there. I agree from a star, if there's a star that would slot in kind of nicely with this team, LaVine, at least in theory, does. But I don't want to touch him with the injury history. And frankly, if the Bulls pick up the phone whenever Jeff Weltman calls, they're silly at this point after what the Magic did to them in 2021. Again, options are going to develop here as we get deeper into the summer. I'll talk about some trade ideas because I actually think the shooter is not where the Magic turn. That's not the most pressing need. I actually think point guard's the most pressing need. So let's go through the point guard bucket coming up here in just a moment. But first, it's time to take a timeout. We're going to take a little break here so we can talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. We're calling a foul. We're going to go to the replay. We're going to just double check things. We've already talked about that. Well, we didn't today. It wasn't our presenting sponsor. There's just so much good stuff in this game that we have to mention it now. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get, like unique stickers you can trade with friends, to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. So I know everyone's obsessed with the shooting thing, and they should be. Shooting is really, really important, and we're going to talk about the point guard bucket, and shooting is an important part of this story too. And so I apologize for saving it for the end. This is the lead of the story here. I actually think the Magic's most important need is a point guard. When I look at the series with the Cavs, the most glaring and pressing need for me was a third guy, especially a guard, who can attack off the dribble, run pick and rolls, just someone to ease the pressure and ease the creation burden from Paolo Banchero. I know we talked about this yesterday and why the Magic lost. And one of the reasons they lost was a lack of offensive diversity. They had only one way to attack. They had only one way to attack. They had only one player who could attack, and they couldn't figure out ways to mix things up consistently enough. The offense was just, frankly, just very simplistic. And Cleveland at a certain point was just able to sit on things and just say, well, if they score on us with this, so be it, they're going to win. And again, they were better defending this at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse than they were at the Kia Center. I pretty much knew game one felt like the problem was shooting and was 3-point shooting. It was just like, we could look at the numbers and say, yeah, the Magic missed a lot of open shots, and that's what it is. I walked out of game two. And I felt like this was the problem in game 5 and game 7 too. I walked out of game 2 saying the issue here is the Magic are banging their head against the wall because they have only one way to attack. And honestly, game 5, when you look at how the Magic lost that game, there was just a lack of organization. There's a lack of just someone to calm everyone down, to help everyone kind of find their poise and find their composure. And so, to me, the biggest need for the Magic is let's get a veteran point guard in here. Let's get someone who doesn't need to be a pound the dirt. I've seen some people pitch Chris Paul as an option for the Magic, and I will admit I toyed with the idea of Chris Paul as a trade target at the deadline, just because I felt like even then, like, hey, the Magic could really use a point guard who just calms everyone down, gets everyone in the right spots. We play slow anyway. We'll figure out the defense, whatever. I don't think Chris Paul is the answer. Do not get me wrong. I would not push chips in for Chris Paul. That is a big salary to take and eat up some space. And again, the Magic just have a very small window right now before the bill comes due on their young players. Another reason why I don't want Paul George and Klay Thompson, I don't want to get stuck with them on their last contract. I don't want to get stuck with them as they age out, as their abilities degrade. And now you're stuck paying them $35 million and they're not giving you $35 million worth of play anymore. To me, those are just very short-term moves. And while I think the Magic need to do things to make the short-term better and improve immediately, they also need to be setting up their chessboard for the long term for the next 3-4 years when Paolo's on his max, when Franz is getting paid $27-28 million a year, when Jalen Suggs is at $22, $23, $24 million a year. The cap this year is $141 million. It'll increase 10% every year once the new collective bargaining agreement comes in. But we're probably looking at $70-80 million of $150-160 million cap being committed to 3 players. Be prepared for that. That's the cost of doing business. If this is your core, if this is the group you believe in, you pay that. And so to me, the need right now is let's find a stopgap point guard. Let's find a solid point guard who can play off the ball, hit 3-pointers, create a little bit for himself, be low turnover, and just kind of fit into what the Magic are doing. Just again, take some of the burden off of Paolo Banchero to create so we can put him in more creative places and use him more creatively because you're not worrying about him bringing the ball up the floor. I probably just described Tyus Jones of the Washington Wizards. He had a fantastic season despite playing for a bad Wizards team. He averaged 12 points per game, shot 40+% from 3. So not a volume 3-point shooter like some of the other guys I described, but really solid player. Had like a 7-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, which is humongous for a team that was really bad with turnovers. They're 25th in the league in turnover rate, I believe. Tyus Jones, the only problem with him is you don't know if he can hold up defensively on an elite defensive team. Obviously, Washington just didn't have the defenders around him, so maybe you can hide him more successfully here in Orlando. He's on the small side, which, the Magic don't particularly like. But Tyus Jones would be a really good signing. You could probably get him for $17-18 million a year. You could probably get him at a fairly affordable price. And I've talked to some people who have watched a little bit of him and watched the Magic and said like, yeah, and brought his name up and they'd be like, I didn't see it before, but after the playoffs, like I do see it. And so, every player that we're talking about in free agency is going to have some flaw that we don't like. You have to figure out where you're going to compromise. So Tyus Jones is very high on my list, just a very solid player. The other guy that I've floated around to people is D'Angelo Russell. Very much similarly, I like the idea of D'Angelo Russell more than I like the player that is D'Angelo Russell. But having said that, we know D'Angelo Russell is a guy who can take over as a star, and that is something I am looking for. I want a guy who knows his role, will play his role, but if Paolo has to miss a game or Franz has to miss a game or he's just feeling it that night, he can take over and be the guy. And this team is unselfish enough that they'll recognize, D'Lo's got it going. Let's feed him the ball. I think it's really good that he played so successfully this year off of LeBron James because for all intents and purposes, the Magic use Paolo Banchero the same way the Lakers use LeBron James. I'm not saying they're the same player, but LeBron plays a lot of point guard. Paolo plays a lot of point guard. So you have a point guard who can be a high assist guy who can make plays off the bounce, run pick and rolls, but also can spread the floor. So again, the idea of D'Angelo Russell, I really like. I think the price tag is going to be a little higher than the Magic want to pay. And he's just wildly inconsistent, as the Lakers discovered this year as well. But the idea of him works for this team. If he can fit into the culture, if he's going to be willing to defend it all, which he hasn't really in his career, but the idea of him works. And so I would not dismiss that hat out of hand. I would think very seriously about that too. The real market for point guards, and it's a very thin point guard market. Those are your two big ones. The real market for point guards is going to be on the trade market. A lot of us, I think a lot of people around the league are expecting the Hawks to split up the DeJounte Murray, Trae Young pairing. No one knows which one they want to trade. There are people already kind of making fake deals to get Trae Young to the Lakers. The Magic were rumored to be hunting for DeJounte Murray a little bit at the trade deadline. We had a discussion with Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks at the deadline that I think would still be relevant today. There's something there. And again, same kind of deal. DeJounte Murray, not the greatest three-point shooter in the world, but can create his own shot, is a decent enough passer, can run pick and rolls, can be the star on a given night when you need him to. That kind of stuff, again, that's the kind of stuff that I'm thinking about. Because like when I look at this Magic team, everyone played their role really well. But outside of, like Paolo's a star, so there's no elevating his role. But when you needed guys to elevate their roles, especially when there are injuries, you just don't have confidence that players are going to consistently elevate their role. Like if you need to go a week without, that week without Franz Wagner, when he was out with the ankle injury, the Magic were like, we can't rely on Jalen Suggs to be that guy. Now, maybe he develops that in the summer. Maybe he gets better off the bounce a little bit, better in pick and roll. So maybe that happens and maybe some of this becomes moot. But so when you're looking at this point guard bucket, Trae Young, DeJounte Murray are kind of two of those guys. Anthony Simons and Malcolm Brogdon from the Blazers are other trade targets. We talked about Brogdon a lot with Mike Richmond at the trade deadline as well. Anthony Simons is kind of a newer name. A lot of Magic fans want him in Orlando just for the homecoming story, which is not enough of a reason. But again, Simons is a guy, can shoot the ball, can play a little bit off the ball, can play some point guard, has good size, has never been asked to defend at a very high level. So that's a big question mark with him. But he'll have a random 30-point game every so often. And so that to me is valuable. I would not be opposed to chasing after Anthony Simons. So there's that option. I would pitch that another option might be CJ McCollum from the Pelicans. We don't know what New Orleans is planning to do to make that roster work. And while CJ McCollum is a little bit on the older side, has a little bit of injury history, I'm not sure I'm completely sold on this idea. It's kind of been odd ramblings in my head, but McCollum is a veteran, very well respected, president of the Players Association, a guy who can get to his spots in the mid-range, make jumpers, have a big game, but can play off the ball and play off of others too. Again, defensively, very suspect though. There's no perfect answer here. But to me, you can see already, like my point guard options ballooned very quickly. I think the play for the Magic this summer is to seek out a point guard, whether that's signing Tyus Jones or D'Angelo Russell, whether that's trading for one in this trade market. I think the answer for this Magic team is to seek a point guard and find someone who can stabilize and organize this team, when things are chaotic in the playoffs, especially, and use that to kind of boost the team up, like give this team a little bit of a higher base so that everyone else can grow around that. To me, that is the option. I mentioned there was everything else. To me, the secret need for the Magic is also at center. I loved Wendell Carter Jr. I think he's been solid. I think he does deserve a chance to be healthy. But at the end of the day, like I said, he hasn't played more than 67 games in any season of his career. Injuries were again the story this year. He was dealing with the hand injury early. He dealt with some knee issues. He had the back spasms late. I've questioned for a while now whether you can win in the playoffs with a center who does not play above the rim. And while I think he was ultimately a positive factor in the series, moving him back to the starting center spot saved the series, in my opinion. And again, I think Jamal Mosley generally made good adjustments, but his initial plan did not work in the series with the Jonathan Isaac at center bit. I think that we also saw Wendell Carter's weaknesses throughout the series, where Evan Mobley was always able to kind of crowd him out. He ultimately always pops instead of rolls. I don't really recall seeing Wendell Carter rolling really hard to the basket on pick and rolls. And so if you are looking to the center market, Nick Claxton of the Nets and Isaiah Hartenstein of the Knicks are both available in free agency this summer. Both, I think, would fit this team. Hartenstein especially. I know we talked about him 2 years ago before he signed with the Knicks. I know we talked about him last summer when I traded for him in the Locked On NBA mock draft. Hartenstein would fit this team really well. Solid passer from the high post, sets really good screens, hard roller, good rim, solid rim protector. Like, I think he'd fit really, and obviously German, so he knows Franz and Mo pretty well. I think he would fit really, really well with this team. I think the Knicks only have early bird rights on him, but the Magic would have to put a pretty big offer, and I wouldn't do that unless I wouldn't trade Wendell Carter unless I know I'm getting one of the two centers on this market, and I wouldn't do that unless I know I have a deal for Wendell Carter to fill my guard need. And again, if you're looking for a way to get two big money players, you go sign Isaiah Hartenstein. Let's say you sign him for $20 million a year. You do that. You trade Wendell Carter's contract. He's making $12 million next season. You trade that for more salary, for more salary coming in, so you can take a little bit more on. You can take, essentially find a $20 million player, take $8 million more in salary, and absorb that into your cap. So there's a lot of machinations you can do, and again, the Magic can be very flexible in trades as well. And again, you cut Joe Ingles, you have room to do all this. You have room to bring in a $20 million guy in a trade and sign a $20 million guy too. You have that capability and flexibility on this trade market. So just something to consider as well. Those are really only scratching the surface of the options. And as always in the NBA, the thing that's going to happen is the thing we don't know yet. Usually when things leak, it's because they're a few weeks behind or they're already dead. And it's the NBA. Things change very, very quickly. And obviously the playoffs are going to change a lot of things as they have already. But that should be your basic guidebook to what options are available for the Magic this offseason and this summer and what direction they can go. I will turn it to you to decide what you like and what you don't like and which way you want the Magic to go or which way you don't. I'm sure you'll let me know about it in the comments. I'm not advocating one way or the other at this juncture. I am still kind of evaluating all the options myself now that the season's over. But I think the main point I want to make here, just if you take away one thing from these last 40 plus minutes, it's that the Magic have a lot of options. It's not a very heavy free agent summer. There's not a lot of great free agents out there, but the Magic have options depending on what they're willing to do. And so if I had Jeff Weltman in a room and I had a directive for him as an owner, as someone who's running the team, I would say, make your plan, commit to it, and execute it. And stand by that decision. Again, the Magic could go in like 4 or 5 different paths and all of them are legitimately fine. It's important that the Magic have an idea of what they want to do, have their targets, and they commit and stick to that plan. And look, I'm not, the way this Magic team is operated, I don't expect them to make 20 million changes. I don't expect 2 new starters, to be perfectly honest, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's 2 new starters next year. I do expect them to get one big name guy or one starter level player to slot into where Gary Harris was playing. I wrote about Gary Harris. It'll be on OnlineMagicDaily.com later today. Did a preview on my Patreon and my subscriber sites. Gary Harris is gone. I like Gary Harris. I think he got a bad rap in the playoffs. Magic asked too much of him. Gary Harris is probably gone. If not, he's only coming back as a bench player at the mid-level. That's fine. But now you got to fill that spot, and you got to fill that spot with what you were missing in the playoffs. And again, I would like, if I had my choice, if I'm going to advocate for a path, it's solve the point guard problem this summer. The shooting problem is not going to fix itself, but it's going to improve on its own. And if you get a point guard in that can shoot, that's going to improve it as well. Fix the point guard problem. That is the direction I would go this summer. But again, the Magic have options. I think that's the important part. I want to thank you for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. Of course, find me on Twitter at @PhilipRR_OMD. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google, by Spotify, Odyssey, and all the film on podcasts to your podcast enablers and device. You can find us as well on YouTube. Just search for Locked On Magic. We're closing in on 3,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is really exciting. Love to see us get that done very, very soon. So definitely if you're not already subscribed on YouTube, you can see my smiling face. If you do so on YouTube, you get to see my wonderful backdrop wall with all my books and my limited Funko Pop collection of Ghostbusters material. You can, of course, find the latest on the Orlando Magic as well at orlandomagicdaily.com. Follow us there on Twitter at omagicdaily. And also be sure to check out my Patreon page, the Orlando Magic Hub. You can find that at patreon.com/Orlando Magic Hub. On our next episode of Locked On Magic, it's draft time. Draft lottery is Sunday. We don't care. We're not in it. But we will talk about some of the options that might be available to the Orlando Magic in the draft lottery, begin introducing you to some key players like we did around the NCAA tournament. We'll get to what the Magic should be looking for at the draft and whether it's going to be another kind of stash year for the Magic. We'll get to that on our next episode of Locked On Magic. But before we sign off, we got to tell you a little bit more about the Locked On Sports Day 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube and now available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Day is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Day now available on the free Fire TV channels app. That's going to do it for me today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. Have a great weekend. We're done with weekend episodes. I'm sorry. No more games. Unless something breaks, we're back to 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Appreciate everyone for hanging with us during the season. Next week on Locked On Magic, like I said, we'll go over some draft options, begin introducing you to the draft class a little bit more and what the Magic's options and goals are on draft night. We will start season recap stuff as well, including player evaluations and talk about individual players and how they performed and their storylines heading into the next season. We'll get to all that. There's still plenty to do here on Locked On Magic, even in the offseason. We'll even talk some NBA playoffs if it becomes relevant to us, especially as we get deeper into the playoffs and toward the finals. But until then, have a great weekend, everyone. For Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.